and there were stains and spots and sometimes vomited regrets of burns and nosebleeds from snorts and the funk of fading fantasies of nights spent with beautiful women who had lips of love and lust. The Vietnam War was not going away. I remember a young man standing in front of a tank, the Beatles songs, Bob Dylan songs, and protests. Everything and everyone who could rebel did, and none of us could stand the government's misuse of power. We marched, shouted, and protested in the streets. Many of us went to jail. The Vietnam War started when I was 12 years old and continued into my 20s. They tried to draft me when I graduated high school, but I did not go. I didn't believe in the Vietnam War and was a conscientious objector. A great musician at the time, Pete Seeger, wrote a letter on my behalf. The letter granted me conscientious objector status and legally kept me out of the service. I refused to go one way or another, but without that letter, I would have gone to jail. I believed the war was immoral, and that neither President Nixon nor President Johnson had a right to make that war happen. So Pete wrote his letter, and I stayed home and attended Dutchess Community College. There was suffering of a different kind in Poughkeepsie. I wanted to get help for the people I loved who suffered from lack of work. I wanted to know if there was a way to increase the chances of survival for the people I saw suffering on the streets. I hoped that the growing homeless population got some assistance to give them hope, but none of this occurred. Instead, it felt like layers and layers of suffering were piled on those people, and they were expected to dig their way out of it. This was one of the more difficult times in my life, because I was also challenged by people who went into the armed forces. I was called a little punk for not going. As the war dragged on and more young men were killed, it was heartbreaking, because I knew the families of some of the boys who didn't come back. I never really got a clear answer for our reason for going to war. Were the Vietnamese people so deeply threatened that we had to kill them? I didn't know then, and still don't know now. Financially, I know the war served a purpose, but morally and ethically, it did not. It helped us grow suspicious of each other. Was that a good thing? In my opinion, no. The 60s were a tumultuous time for many. Although integration was relatively new and constricted, I lived through the 60s freely. It was a time of serial sexual encounters with multiple women. It was a time of free-spiritedness. It was Woodstock, a 3-day festival in the summer of 1969, during which hundreds of thousands of people flocked to see the greatest music of the time, stayed overnight, had sex outside, smoked grass, drank liquor, and enjoyed being drunk and high. There, we explored every possibility and every combination. It felt like nothing was left to question, because we basically had tried it all. We used to get so high that we didn't know we were high. It felt like there was something wrong with everybody else, because we had snorted and smoked the sight. We knew that we had the insight of the sight of sightlessness, a sight that would give insight to the sightless, and give sight from our oversight that would lead to sight for the sightless. Dig it? If they could only see our sight, the whole world would be at peace. The sightless would see for the first time. The blind would open their eyes to sight that would end the fight and would shine the light forever. Dig it. It was the freest time in the world until something called herpes came along. Before that, the worst you could get was crabs. When I was a young man, I was most frightened by waking one morning next to an unknown female and finding myself itching the whole day afterward. The doctor I visited picked from my pubic hairs a crawling creature called a crab. I examined its eyes and clinging appendages, overwhelmed by curiosity and panic. I thought I would die because I had never seen a crawling creature called a crab, and asked the doctor if it was the end. He assured me the condition was curable. The doctor sprayed my genitals and gave me a cream to apply so the monsters would die. A miracle occurred. and the crabby monsters slowly disappeared.